December 1944. The Ardennes forest. Snow fell silently over the frozen landscape as German tanks rolled through the darkness. American lines were smashed in what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge in the besieged town of Bastogne. The 101st Airborne faced annihilation. But they had something the Germans did not expect, something that would help them survive against impossible odds. Strapped to the backs of radio operators was a device weighing just over 30 pounds. When German assault threatened, a sergeant grabbed the handset and called for artillery support. His voice, clear as a telephone call, cut through the chaos of battle. Within minutes, shells rained down on the advancing enemy, breaking up the attack. That device was the SCR-300 Walkie Talkie, and the story of how it came to exist is a tale of one engineer who dared to challenge the entire United States military. This is the tale of the forbidden radio that helped win World War II. We went to the summer of 1940. Europe was burning. France had collapsed under the Nazi blitzkrieg in just 6 weeks. Britain stood alone against Hitler, its cities ablaze under German bombing raids. Though America remained officially neutral, anyone paying attention knew war was coming. The United States military was scrambling to modernize. Years of peacetime neglect had left the armed forces desperately unprepared for modern warfare. Among the many deficiencies military planners faced, one stood out as particularly critical: battlefield communications. Modern mechanized warfare moved at unprecedented speed. Tank divisions could advance dozens of miles in a single day. Infantry units needed to coordinate with precision. Artillery batteries needed targeting information in real time. Commanders at every level needed situational awareness from reliable communications. But the radios available to American soldiers in 1940 were utterly inadequate for these demands. The portable radios used amplitude modulation, or AM. On paper, AM seemed perfectly adequate. It was proven, reliable, and well understood by the military. There was just one devastating problem. AM radios were nearly useless on a modern battlefield. Every running engine, every electrical motor, every piece of military equipment generated electromagnetic noise that overwhelmed AM signals. A tank platoon trying to coordinate with infantry would hear nothing but crackling static. Artillery observers would lose contact at the worst possible moments. The situation was so bad that many infantry officers had simply given up on radio communications entirely. They preferred to send runners carrying written messages. Runners could be killed or wounded. Messages might arrive too late, but at least runners were reliable. Radios were not. Into this crisis stepped a man named Daniel Earl Noble. Born in 1901 in Connecticut, Noble had earned his engineering degree and made his name designing the first statewide two-way FM radio system for Connecticut State Police. FM stood for Frequency Modulation, a fundamentally different approach to radio transmission that offered stunning advantages over AM. FM signals rejected electrical interference in ways that AM simply could not. Where AM dissolved into static near engines, AM cut through cleanly. Noble had witnessed these advantages firsthand with his police radio system, and he knew FM could solve the battlefield communications crisis. In September 1940, Noble walked through the doors of Galv in Manufacturing Corporation in Chicago as their new director of research. Galvin had developed a compact handheld unit called the SCR-536 that impressed Army evaluators. But it had a crippling limitation. Its maximum range was roughly 1 mile. 1 mile was adequate for platoon communications, but it was completely useless for anything beyond that. The gap in military communications remained wide open. Shortly after Noble arrived at Galvin, he accompanied the chief engineer to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, to present the SCR-536 to Signal Corps officers. The officers made clear they needed something more. A portable radio with substantially greater range that could still be carried by an infantryman in combat. The Signal Corps had already contracted for development of a new portable radio. and they had specified that it must use AM technology. When Noble learned of this decision, his response was immediate and forceful. He told the Signal Corps officers that specifying AM was a grave mistake. This was an extraordinarily bold stance. Noble was essentially telling the military establishment that they were wrong about fundamental technical choices. He was advocating for a more complex and potentially more expensive approach. He was asking the Army to gamble on technology that many engineers considered impractical. A had real drawbacks. It required wider bandwidth than AM. AM circuitry was more complex, raising concerns about reliability in field conditions. But Noble understood something crucial. He understood that if AM's advantages were not marginal improvements, they were fundamental game changers for battlefield communications. His conviction and his track record of success with the Connecticut police system carried the day. The Signal Corps issued a contract to Galvin for an FM portable radio. The designation assigned to this new radio would be SCR-300. Noble moved quickly to assemble his engineering team. At the core was Henry Magnus Key, a brilliant Polish immigrant who would serve as principal RF engineer. Marion Bond, Lloyd Morris, and Bill Vogel rounded out the group, each bringing specialized expertise in different aspects of radio design. They would need every ounce of that combined knowledge, because the Army's specifications for the SCR-300 were extraordinarily demanding. The radio had to be battery-powered with enough capacity for extended field operations. It had to weigh no more than 35 pounds complete with all accessories. It had to provide reliable communications over at least 3 miles in varying terrain. It had to be water-resistant and simple enough for soldiers with minimal training to operate. It had to tune across frequencies from 40 to 48 megacycles, and critically, it could use only 2 frequency control crystals because crystal production was a wartime bottleneck. Meeting all these specifications simultaneously seemed almost impossible. Each requirement alone was challenging. Together, they represented an engineering puzzle of extraordinary difficulty. One morning in late 1940, Noble placed an official document before his engineers. He spoke words that would burn themselves into their memories forever. "I want you to start working on this immediately. The Signal Corps has placed a life and death priority on this program for the infantry. You will get whatever assistance you need, and I expect to see a prototype fabricated as soon as possible." The weight of responsibility was immense. If they succeeded, they would give American soldiers a communications capability no army had ever possessed. If they failed, soldiers would continue to die because they could not call for help when they needed it most. Working furiously against time, Noble's team developed a design that was revolutionary in multiple ways. They created a single tuning control adjusting both transmitter and receiver simultaneously. They incorporated automatic frequency control circuitry, ensuring clear communication without precision tuning. They designed circuits operating efficiently on battery power. The radio they created was an 18-to battery-operated VHF unit using FM transmission. It incorporated an adjustable squelch circuit, a feature new to radios. With AM radios, operators endured constant hissing whenever no one transmitted. The squelch circuit silenced the receiver when no signal was present. When a transmission came through, the sudden break of silence commanded immediate attention. A single control knob provided access to 41 channels. The carefully designed crystals using harmonic relationships provided calibration for all these frequencies, an elegant solution to the 2-crystal limitation. The entire radio could be configured for relay operation, allowing to SCR-300 units to extend communications range by retransmitting signals automatically. By spring of 1942, the team had two working prototypes ready for testing. The moment of truth came on a bright spring day at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Henry Magnus Key stood on the roof of a building, prototype radio strapped to his back. 8 miles away, far beyond the 3-mile range the Army had specified, his colleague waited with the second prototype. Magnus keyed the transmit button and spoke into the handset. 8 miles away, every word came through with perfect clarity. They tested and retested, trying different frequencies, different orientations. The prototypes performed flawlessly every time. When Signal Corps representatives arrived for formal evaluation, they witnessed demonstrations impressive enough to grant immediate approval for production development. The production version was designated BC-1000. Combined with batteries and accessories, the complete SCR-300 system weighed approximately 38 pounds. This was slightly over the original specification, but the Army accepted the additional weight as a reasonable trade-off for exceptional performance. For final acceptance tests, the production SCR-300 traveled to Fort Knox, where it underwent comprehensive trials. The Infantry Board had been invited to observe. The Infantry Board was known throughout the Army for being highly critical and skeptical of manufacturers' claims. Bob Galvin, son of company founder Paul Galvin, accompanied Dan Noble to these critical tests. They had only two working production models. If anything went wrong, if the radios failed to perform as promised, the entire program could be jeopardized. Each night during the testing period, the team returned to their hotel and carefully inspected both radios, checking every component and connection. The performance exceeded everyone's expectations. The radios communicated clearly through engine noise from vehicles, proving FM's resistance to interference. The equipment continued functioning after rough handling, drops, and exposure to rain. The Infantry Board officers responded with unusual enthusiasm. This radio actually worked as advertised. It worked in conditions that would have rendered AM radios useless. It was robust enough for field service. The Signal Corps placed orders for production. Galvin Manufacturing would go on to produce nearly 50,000 SCR-300 units during the war. The first units off assembly lines were rushed by air transport to combat zones because communications failures had already cost lives. August 1943. The volcanic island of New Georgia in the Solomon Islands. American forces pushed forward in their island-hopping campaign across the Pacific. The SCR-300 made its combat debut in some of the most challenging communications terrain imaginable. Colonel Ann Ken Brandt, the theater signal officer, had initially been deeply skeptical about VHF radios and jungle operations. Thick vegetation absorbed radio waves. But when the radios arrived in quantity and troops began using them in actual combat, everything changed. By January 1944, and Ken Brandt was writing enthusiastic reports declaring that the SCR-300 sets were exactly what was needed for front-line communications. The phrase "exactly what is needed" from a skeptical officer represented powerful vindication of Noble's technical choices. Second Lieutenant Joseph Dooley, who actually carried the radio in combat, called the SCR-300 an infantryman's dream for better communication and control. An infantryman's dream. Those words from a junior officer who had led soldiers through jungle combat represented exactly the endorsement Noble's team had hoped to earn. September 1943, Allied forces stormed ashore at Salerno in Calabria, invading the Italian mainland. The SCR-300 saw its first use in the European theater as radio operators waded through surf with 30-plus pound radios on their backs. Company commanders could talk directly to battalion headquarters miles to the rear. As companies advanced, they maintained contact even through terrain obstacles. Forward artillery observers could now call for fire with unprecedented reliability. From observation post smiles from their batteries, they would spot enemies and radio precise coordinates. Batteries would fire, observers would watch impacts, and corrections would flow back instantly. This observer adjust fire cycle was fundamental to effective artillery support. Previously, this critical link had been frustratingly unreliable. Observers would watch perfect targets and be completely unable to call in fire because their radios would not work. The SCR-300 changed everything. AM signals cut through battlefield interference. Fire missions that once took many minutes could now be executed in a fraction of the time. June 6, 1944. D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. The SCR-300 played a critical role as American troops fought their way off the beaches at Omaha-du-Tond, pushed into the hedgerow country of Normandy. The bocage was nightmarish terrain for infantry, every field surrounded by thick hedgerows providing perfect defensive positions for German troops. The ability to coordinate small unit actions and call for supporting fire was absolutely essential. The SCR-300 allowed platoons and companies to stay in contact. It allowed them to call for tank support to blast through embankments. It allowed them to direct fire onto German positions invisible until they opened fire. And then came December 1944, the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. American units were thrown back in confusion by the surprise German offensive. Communications were disrupted, units isolated, command and control breaking down across entire sectors. But in key locations like Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne held out against surrounding forces, the SCR-300 proved its worth once more. Despite bitter cold that sapped battery life, despite chaos and confusion, the radios allowed defenders to maintain cohesive defense. They could shift forces to meet threatened breakthroughs. They could coordinate artillery that broke up German attacks again and again. The encircled forces held until relief finally arrived, and reliable communications were a crucial factor in their survival. By the end of the war in 1945, the SCR-300 had become ubiquitous on battlefields around the world. It had proven itself in Pacific jungles, Italian mountains, Norman hedgerows, and German forests. Marines in the Pacific were particularly enthusiastic. The British military recognized its superiority and began developing their own version, which entered service as the wireless set number 31. The significance of the SCR-300's contribution was formally recognized at the highest levels. Major General Roger Colton recommended Daniel Noble for the Certificate of Merit. Noble accepted the honor not just for himself, but for his entire team. Henry Magnus Ski, Marion Bond, Lloyd Morris, Bill Vogel, and everyone who had worked on this project. He also received a letter from Edwin Armstrong, the inventor of FM radio technology itself. Armstrong had spent his life fighting for acceptance of FM. Armstrong wrote to congratulate Noble and thank him for proving the value of FM in such decisive and undeniable fashion. The success of the SCR-300 did more than help win a war. It fundamentally changed military communications technology forever. It sounded the death knell for AM and tactical military radios and established FM as the standard for battlefield communications for decades to come. It began with an engineer who refused to accept that the established way was the only way, who looked at what military communications needed rather than what tradition demanded. And it culminated with two engineers standing 8 miles apart on a spring day in Kentucky, proving that sometimes the forbidden approach is exactly what victory requires. The SCR-300 gave American soldiers something no army had ever possessed: the ability to communicate reliably across the chaos of modern warfare. That ability saved thousands of lives and contributed materially to Allied victory. One general would later declare it the single most useful piece of communications equipment in Europe. All because one engineer dared to insist that the Army was wrong about AM radio, and was willing to stake his reputation on proving it. If you want more hardcore breakdowns of history's turning points in military technology, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. I'm your History of Innovation guide. I'll see you